Good morning. Today on Spotlight, a look at the role one of Detroit's major banks is playing in joining a team of very diverse leaders to help move Michigan and this metropolitan region forward. Executives Matt Elliott and Tiffany Douglas of Bank of America will tell us. And later, Detroit businessman and State Fairgrounds investor Marvin Beatty shares his point of view of the future of that very important 160 acres in Detroit. It's Sunday, March the 18th. I'm Chuck Stokes, and this is Spotlight. Matt, let me start with you. In your role as a banker, would it be too simplistic to say your primary responsibility is to make sure that you have a good return on investment for those who've invested in Bank of America?
Our primary responsibility is actually to fulfill our mission, which is to improve the financial lives of our clients, our customers, and our communities. If we do that right, we'll make a good return. And we've got a framework to think about that, which we can talk about in a bit. But, you know, above all else, it comes down to the people that we take care of first and foremost.
Very good. Tiffany Douglas, your primary responsibility to make sure that the money that Bank of America makes gets well invested in the community, and that name brand of BOA is a good name brand with the public.
That's true, and we really take our investments seriously, Chuck. We look to invest in economic mobility for communities and families. So that could be anywhere from workforce investment for young people and career pathways to making sure that we have sustainable neighborhoods for Detroiters in the region. That helps us to make sure that we're on path for great things to come.
So a lot of talk these days about where the region is, growing the region, making sure that we're competitive with other regions. The two of you get to travel a lot, in-state, out-of-state. If you're trying to sell someone on coming to Michigan or coming to Southeast Michigan, what's your best pitch?
The thing I love to say, and we've heard it a lot around the region lately, is Detroit is big enough to make or small enough where you can make a difference, but big enough to matter. And we've got a lot of people here and we've got a lot of great resources that we can leverage off, but we're still a work in progress, and that's the fun part. You know, I mean, if you want to be successful here, it's a participation sport, not a spectator sport.
Okay. And Tiffany, what about the challenges? Because there are always challenges out there, and if you're entertaining someone across that table and they maybe have heard some stereotypes about this region, how do you combat that? And what's real and what's false, especially coming behind an Amazon decision where they say, not enough talent and transit doesn't work?
Well, I think you, first of all, address them, head on. Those are very true and real challenges. But I think you have to understand the narrative. You have to understand the history, because some people just will place us in a point in time and say, well, this is a problem, when they don't understand the bigger narrative. And if we can understand what the history is and what the narrative is, I think we can address the challenges more aggressively and make sure that everyone, like Matt said, is on. It's a not a spectator sport. You got to get in the game. You can't just complain about the challenges, but what are you doing to help make a difference?
As you sit with business leaders of Michigan and other organizations, what do you bring to the table?
Yeah, we bring a lot to the table if we're doing our job correctly, and we think we are. Philanthropically, we invest on average about $3 million a year in Michigan, a lot of it in Southeast Michigan in terms of philanthropic work. But more importantly, when we just go to work and do our work every day, we make really big investments in the industries that matter most to Michigan. So, for example, since the end of the financial crisis, nobody has raised more capital for the automotive industry than us, and we're really proud of that. And we were the second largest lender to small business in Metro Detroit last year.
I know you've worked very closely with the Grow Detroit's Young Talent Program. Why is that so important? And from your vantage point, is it working?
It is absolutely working. We put over 8,000 young people to work last summer in Detroit, Chuck. And I think that's critical for three reasons. One is young people have to see a future for them here in Detroit. They have to understand the anatomy of a paycheck. What does it mean to actually have value to your work? How do you find the worth in yourself? And if we're not training our young people to have a work ethic, how to get to work, what to wear, who to meet, how to engage, we are doing our businesses a severe detriment. So we're trying to make sure that the pathways to work and work readiness are available. And we all have a story about our first job. We can all remember, right? Like,
I remember mine.
right. Or I remember saying, why did I think I was making this much per hour, but I got this in my paycheck?
Right.
And so those discussions, I think, are really, really important, and it is making a difference.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. How do you prioritize, one, who you want to work with, and then what kind of evaluation do you put in terms of, okay, that's a good match for us. This may be a great nonprofit, but doesn't work for us.
Yeah, there are a lot of great nonprofits, and so that's the luxury. But the hard part is figuring out where we can make the most difference. So the first thing we do is think about our priorities. Like Tiffany said earlier, we're really focused on economic mobility. So that's workforce readiness, that's critical needs. And that's usually housing and access to affordable housing. So if you start with that lens and then you really drill in and say, where do we have points of overlap? Where do we have board ties? Do we know the people? Do we know that if we make an investment that it's going to be multiplied through our own volunteer efforts, things like that? Then we start to whittle down the list to a place where we think we can really make a difference.
The one that is going to pay us the most dividends for years to come is the youth employment initiatives. It's gratifying to see a young person, and we've actually seen this now happen, that when they first got their job at 14 or 15, that we've seen them now at 20 and what that has meant to them. And so I think that's probably the most gratifying, because you can see really how it does change the trajectory of not only their life, but in many cases their family's life. And what does that mean? What is the ripple effect in their community?
Neighborhood Builders Program, what is that?
So we've worked, for example, with Build Institute, helping to have young entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs say, I want to take the next step and actually open a business. Mm-hmm. Or they may say, you know what, that's really not going to work. Let's rethink how you're going to go to market and go back to the drawing board. So that's Build Institute as an example. They're a high-functioning organization that receives not only the unrestricted grant, but like Harvard education for a nonprofit organization, which in many cases, organizations that are just working day to day to get the work done, the impact that they want to see are not afforded in the same way that maybe other folks are afforded in corporations. So we take our builders and we prop them up and we give them the unrestricted grant and support them with this education over a 2-year process. And for the most part, a lot of organizations have said, we thought the grant was going to be the biggest thing, but they come out of it saying that the education, the opportunity to be in a room where they didn't have board members, volunteers, their community, their constituencies, to just talk about the challenges or the opportunities and how to do that was really gratifying and relieving, because in many cases you're always in front of somebody that you're trying to serve. So our builders are just that. They're organizations that build this community every day.
Matt, when you're in the various board meetings that you're at, and you're sitting on a lot of different boards, what's the biggest concern? What's the thing that you and other CEOs talk the most about? And when you're sitting in a room with Mayor Duggan and other public leaders, what are you hearing the most from?
Sustainability. We no longer have the luxury of crisis. We've come out of the various crises that we've had at the state level, in a lot of ways, the city level for sure, the automotive industry, the financial crisis, those are past. And so on the one hand, there is a luxury in crisis in the sense that it's right in front of you in terms of what you know you need to do. The question now is, now that we've had some success, we're out of crisis, how do we sustain success and really build a long-term lasting future?
And not slip backwards.
And not slip backwards. And those are the things that we spend a lot of time on. So some of the things that are the leading indicators of that are, what's our educational attainment in the state? And it's quite low. It's 46th in the country. 23% of our high school seniors are college and career ready. That's not going to get it done if we want to be successful and sustainable over the long haul. That's just one example, but we more than anything else talk about sustainability.
The Amazon decision, on reflection, was that maybe good for this region?
I think it's important to get out of your own echo chamber and to get some third-party feedback sometimes, even if that feedback's harsh, which it was. But the facts are, and you already talked about it, it was about education, it's about transit. And those are real barriers to our success long-term. And so if we take that feedback and we really act on it, we can turn that into a positive.
Jerry Anderson, CEO of DTE Energy, when I interviewed him not too long ago, on transit, he said, point blankly, this region needs to get its act together. Agree or disagree?
Agree. You know, it's a structural barrier to employment. It's a structural barrier to education. And if we're going to be successful as a region, and as you said, I travel a lot, and there are a lot of regions who have been able to figure out transit, we can do it. And we just need to make sure we get it done.
All right. Tiffany Douglas, financial literacy. How involved is Bank of America?
We like to call it financial education, Chuck, because the education that you get opens up so many other windows and opportunities. So we have created a site called bettermoneyhabits.com. It is powered with Khan Academy, and it is a free site to anyone that talks about different life priorities, right? Why a banking account? Why a savings account? What does compound interest mean? How do I get a mortgage? What does that mean? So these are small videos that help people to understand the topics generally, and then there's a lot more specificity around articles that people can dive into deeper. But it's a great opportunity, and it's a great access portal for folks to just get it where they are comfortably from your mobile phone or from the library or right at home. So bettermoneyhabits.com is, I think, an opportunity that we take into schools, to our nonprofits, to small businesses, and all of our teammates actually use it.
All right, Tiffany Douglas, Matt Elliott. This is proof that a Wisconsin grad and a Michigan State grad can sit next to each other and get along without fussing and fighting. All right. We appreciate you coming in and sharing all this information, and we will get you back. We'll be back with more on Spotlight. And coming up on Spotlight, businessman Marvin Beatty's role on the State Fairgrounds development controversy. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Spotlight. Joining me now down here at theCUBE is Marvin Beatty. He's a Detroit businessman involved in so many different things. I was looking at the different boards you sit on. Of course, you're affiliated with Greektown Casino, NAACP, Downtown Detroit Authority, Detroit Riverfront Conservancy, Music Hall, Detroit Economic Growth Corporation, Coleman Young Foundation, etc. When the heck do you sleep?
Well, sleeping is a blessing.
Okay.
But I'm at the age now where I get my 7 hours sleep.
Okay. All right.
I get me 7 hours because I need to. This is about staying alive and staying healthy.
All right. Well, obviously, I point that out because you're very involved with the city and the revitalization of the city from a number of different hats. I want to segue off of the interview last week on Spotlight, where we had Karen and Frank Hammer on from the State Fairgrounds Development Coalition. And if I could sum it up in a nutshell, they speculated that on the March 21st Michigan Land Bank meeting that they think there's a good chance that the city may want to take control of the 160 acres at the State Fairgrounds, and that the investment group that you've been involved with Magic Johnson and others, may toss you guys out, and it opens up the whole thing again. Your reaction?
Well, the Hammer group, who has been around since the first RFP went out, for which they had a tremendous amount of ideas, but they didn't bid on it.
Yeah, they clearly said that they weren't trying to develop it, but they wanted to be sort of watchdogs, so whoever got it, that it would be good for that community, surrounding community.
Chuck, I'm a big part of Gateway Marketplace, which is the shopping center at 8 Mile and Woodward.
Right.
That was a community-based development.
That's where the Myers.
That's where the Myers and all of that is, and it's doing extremely successful in part because of the neighbors, the people who live in the community. So I get how important it is that a development meets the concerns and the interest and the needs of the community. We've demonstrated that we had that capability. And this development is certainly no different. There are a tremendous amount of needs: housing, education, retail, small community activities that are essential for that site. We haven't lost sight of what's important to the people in that community.
Does the group that you're in, the Magic group, do you still want to develop that, or have you made so many different adjustments and different hoops and hurdles through the years that you guys we'd rather not be involved with it, let the city do whatever they want to do?
No, not at all. In fact, you know, we have very much a tremendous amount of interest in our continued relationship with the Old State Fair site. You know, the State Land Bank and the City of Detroit have obviously been working on issues that speak to land that's in the City of Detroit that the state may own or operate. So that discussion, for which I am not privy to. But what I am clearly understanding is that that land is going to have to be developed. And it's going to have to be developed in a way that is community-based and is focused on how do you bring the maximum number of job opportunities to that site so that it can help Detroiters along with transportation, a transportation hub that's essential going north and going south into the city. So all of those things are part of how we see this thing going forward. Now, what the city and the state does on March 21st is your guess as good as mine.
Your proposal is already before them.
Our proposal is in long since sets with the city. The city, we've had some discussion about what is important to them, for which we think is necessary in order to make this thing successful. Look, without a partnership with the city of Detroit and the state of Michigan, a site of that size, irrespective of the fact that it is one of the best assembled sites in this city, it doesn't work without government's participation.
Do you feel as though the city and the state have operated in good faith with your development group?
Well, you know, I think this. I think that, you know, good faith will be determined at the outcome. What's happened up to now, I think, is a lot of conversation between two parties, the state and the city, for which we as developers have not necessarily participated in, but certainly know that we have a considerable investment that we've put into that site currently, and that we will, and you know, when we get to the table to discuss it with whomever it ends up with from a standpoint of government, we'll work through that issue in order to make sure that our participation, one, is ongoing, and two, that, you know, that the city and Magic Plus become benefactors of the project.
All right, we need to take a little break. We'll come right back with some more questions to Marvin Beatty. Stay with us. And welcome back to Spotlight. Marvin, 160 acres, that's a lot of land.
It's a big piece,
do you have any inclination from your dealings with the city of Detroit, the planning department, Maurice Cox heads that up, any idea what they might want to see from that 160 acres? Do they want part of it? Do they not want you all to have all of it, some of it, or do you even know?
You know, look, I think that they, in their big picture, in their vision for the big picture, certainly think about a portion of that site for some kind of industrial, light industrial space. We can do that. We can deliver that just like anybody else can.
You all have the wherewithal, have the investment dollars, have everything it takes, because one of the things that I think the Hammers sort of intimated was that shovels were supposed to have been in the ground 2 years ago. They aren't in the ground, and they're kind of throwing their hands up.
Well, look, it took us 8 years to develop Gateway Marketplace. 8 years. It was only 37 acres. So this is 160, so it's 3 times as big. It's got a whole lot of historic value. There's a lot of people in play. The city certainly has the opportunity to take our development plan, look at it, compare it to some of the things that they think are essential towards making that site as productive as possible, because that's all we all want, is a productive site that also provides some opportunity for as many jobs as possible, and at the same time, an education component, a transportation component, a living component, a retail component. All of those things integrated into one makes the Old State Fair site a great experience for a whole lot of people.
Whoever develops that, they have to get the stamp of approval from the city?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
Yes, they do.
if it turns out where the city says, no, we don't want Magic Plus to develop it, or we don't want them to develop all 160 acres, what's your concern then? That the amount of money and time that you've put into all of this, that you're made whole on that?
Sure. I mean, look, I mean, we've been at this. We've hired architects. We've done design, site design. We've done all of the things up to a place where we're ready to go. So there's a certain amount of investment that has been put into the State Fair that as a developer, you would expect that if it was to move to someplace else, that you'd be made whole. So they are inextricably intertwined into this whole thing. Magic Plus, State of Michigan, and the City of Detroit.
There seems to be a decent amount of secrecy around this. From the city standpoint, we've invited Maurice Cox to come on Spotlight and be interviewed. They won't return our calls. They won't return our emails. But yet they're all receiving their salary from the taxpayers. Why do you think this has become so secret?
Well, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. Here you have 3 very capable African-American developers who want to play a huge role in the revitalization of this community. I don't think that's offensive to the city in any way, but what I do think is that there are a lot of ideas, a lot of possibilities they think that can happen there. We just haven't had the opportunity to sit down and discuss at length what all those opportunities are and how this partnership, which ultimately will become a partnership between a developer and the City of Detroit, has to get into the sandbox and play for the same goal.
Final question, should the community, should the residents of Detroit be watching this and watching this very, very closely? In the mayor's State of the City address, he said what happens to the neighborhoods to a great extent depends on those who have remained here through the good times and the bad times, and not just come in during the revitalization times.
Well, I'm one of those persons. I've been here my entire life. I've spent my entire career working in this city. We have the capability to develop this site, whether it's 160 acres or 30 acres. We can work with the city and work with anybody who is willing to make sure that the right thing happens for the community that is so important out there and continues to grow and continues to really be a magnet for how people enter into the City of Detroit.
All right, Marvin Bay, thank you for coming in. Obviously, we haven't heard the last of this situation, but we'll keep a close watch on it.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Appreciate you.
And we want to thank you at home for joining us. I'm Chuck Stokes. We'll be back next week with more Newsmakers in the Spotlight. We hope you have a great week.